The entrance is located in Karnak, Texas. From 43, go east on 134 into Karnak, turn left at the post office, cross the tracks, and enter into the Refuge. One of the most comfortable ways to see some of the Refuge is by driving on the auto tour route. The 6-mile-long auto tour is along some of the many paved roads. Note that many of the paved roads that are not on the actual auto tour route are posted with road closed signs. The site of the Refuge was a part of the territory of the Caddo Indian Nation. But eventually, this area of the Refuge became home to a great mix of early pioneers, including settlers who took up residence and trappers and fishermen who camped along the river and the Caddo Lake shoreline. Timber operators and cotton plantations took advantage of the site's abundant forests and the rich river foam soil. Obtained by the U.S. Army in 1941, today's Refuge was once a munitions site until the end of the Cold War. Recognizing the importance of the wetlands, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approached the Army about turning the munitions site into a wildlife refuge to be managed for the benefit of wildlife. So on October 19th of 2000, the Caddo Lake National Wildlife Refuge was established. Today, the refuge's forests and wetlands are set aside for the benefit of wildlife and are home to a diversity of wildlife and plant species. It's free of charge. Visitors can enjoy wildlife watching, fishing, hiking, biking, and an auto tour route and horseback riding. After World War II broke out, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army moved quickly to expand the production of munitions to support the war effort. In this initiative, Lyndon Johnson was a congressman at the time, and his wife had relatives that lived in the Karnak area. So he was aware of some property and arranged for that property to be sold to the United States Army for the purpose of building what became in 1942 the Longhorn Army Ammunition Plant. And their purpose was to produce TNT. Over the years, with the exception of a 7-year period when it was just on standby, the Longhorn plant, over 55 years, was involved in manufacturing a variety of munitions. Some of them incendiary devices, some rocket motors. So this was a secret Army facility with high security. At one point, there were 451 buildings. They had their own power and water treatment plant. And then there was railroad trails for the movement of raw materials and finished product. Well, in 1952, after they'd been on standby for a few years, the plant was reactivated and operated by Universal Match Corporation. And during the Korean War, they expanded its mission to include loading, assembling, and packing rocket motors and pyrotechnic ammunition. I guess some of the things that were produced there later were rocket motors in 1956, propellants and motors for the Falcon, Lacrosse, Honest John, and Sergeant line of missiles. And then as production increased, so did their capacity. In 1959, a main rocket motor assembly building was constructed along with static testing building. Longhorn produced illuminating and pyrotechnic ammunitions during Vietnam era. In 1977, the plant was designated a core facility for the production of solid propellant rocket motors and pyrotechnic type ammunition. The facility produced both the first and second stages of the Pershing 1A missiles, and the facilities were modernized in the late 70s and early 80s. Then in 1988, the Longhorn ammunition facility played a significant role in history when it was the site where the first U.S. missiles were destroyed as a part of the U.S.-Soviet treaty, in which they began downsizing and destroying nuclear weapons. So there was a period of time there where Russian observers came to the site and were actually witnessing the destruction of hundreds and hundreds of missiles. So in 1997, the Army declared the Longhorn facility to be in excess of its needs. And the following year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requested that the site be transferred to them for the purpose of establishing a national wildlife refuge. Portions of the Longhorn lands were declared an EPA Superfund site and subject to extensive remediation to remove chemical waste and other hazards, while the National Forest Service began focusing on the management of the habitat for the conservation and protection of migratory and resident waterfowl and neotropical migratory birds that utilize these important wetlands. In September of 2009, the Caddo Lake National Wildlife Refuge was opened to the public for wildlife-dependent recreation. Some of the visitor activities there include wildlife watching and nature trails. There's an old railroad right-of-way that's a 9-mile nature trail. And then there's several shorter trails that are available. One is the Visitor Center Trail, another is the Cemetery Trail, another is the Magazine Trail, and then there's the Star Ranch Trail. Some of these old roads that still remain provide a lot of options for visitors to hike or to bike or use for watching wildlife. They do allow biking. When you first come in, there's a large parking lot. I'm talking about bicycle bike lane. There's a large parking lot on the left of when you first enter that you park your car and unload your bike, and then you can ride the bike around on most of the trails. However, there are some roads, I should say roads, not trails, but there are roads, blacktop roads. Some of them have signs. They're closed to all traffic. Then there's, of course, the auto tour route that I talked about earlier. And then there's an equestrian route. And the refuge has a 9-mile multi-use wildlife observation trail that equestrian riders are allowed to use, provided they register and obtain a number and a tag. And then there's hunting. The refuge offers hunts during the appropriate season for whitetail deer and for feral hog. There are pretty substantial rules that involve gaining access and making application and paying a fee to be able to hunt on the property. And then here's some of the rules and regulations. Persons possessing, transporting, or carrying firearms on the National Wildlife Refuge must comply with all provisions of state and local law. Persons may only use or discharge firearms in accordance with the refuge regulations. Legally licensed vehicles are allowed in the refuge and are restricted to roads that are open to travel. No off-highway vehicles, ATVs, ATCs, UTVs are allowed on the refuge. Boats used for any recreational activity, hunting and wildlife viewing, must be removed from the refuge daily. The refuge closes, they open at daylight and close at dark. There is, or was, a ramp, but at the Star Ranch location, but it's now only available for launching canoes and kayaks. And, of course, roads may be closed any time due to adverse weather. Persons with disabilities are encouraged to participate in refuge hunts and other activities. Dogs are required to wear a collar displaying owner's name, address, phone number. Horses are permitted only on roads open to motorized traffic. No riding off-road into fields, woods, or foot trails. Bicycles, again, are allowed, but must remain on improved roads at all times. So as you ride through, you'll see signs very frequently that say, this area restricted, no, do not trespass beyond this point. So a lot of the refuge is not accessible other than by being on the blacktop road, and you're not able to cut across or to enter into the wooded areas. And there's no camping and no fires allowed on the refuge. As I say, it's day use only. Here's one of the maps posted in the refuge. This is a photo showing a tree break visible from the road. Another tree break, zoomed. The same tree break, but a distant view. The break in the distance was adjacent to one of the nature trails. Posters with old photos of the munitions plant. One of the kiosks along the auto tour route. A possible teepee structure, zoomed. One of the many signs along the road restricting access off of the roadway. Another old photo of the ammunitions era. Old photos of the plant when they produced TNT. Same area today. Concrete buildings still standing. View showing how the forest has reclaimed the land. Photo showing the inside of the first concrete building from the front. Old concrete structures adjacent to the concrete buildings. Old door from the back of the first building laying on the ground. Interior of the first building taken from the back. A hive of honeybees going into the second building. You could hear them buzzing from a distance away. This is the second building, and the bees are in that top left corner. Interior of the second building. More ruins. Oops. Equestrian check station next to the entry gate. Signs when you first enter. The entry gate when you first enter the property. for more information, you can go to www.fws.gov/refuge/Caddo Lake/about.html.